So Genshin Impact is no stranger to controversy. So I've created an iceberg of many of the big controversies this game has had over the years. This iceberg ranges from behaviour, to things that have happened online in the community, to big, massive scandals. And I'm going to be going over it today, so sit back, relax, and I hope you enjoy. Starting with general player behaviour, Genshin players can get very judgmental and nitpicky over a lot of things. One of these things is damage. You see, you'll often see people online hitting numbers in the millions of characters, and if you get too caught up in things like that, you'll start obsessing over numbers when you play, and wanting to hit harder as a result. While this in itself isn't bad, since it's always nice to see your own improvements, what is a bad thing is if you project those expectations onto other people. It's not entirely uncommon for people in co-op to judge other people's damage, which is a direct result of this problem. It's important to remember that Genshin is primarily a single player game, so being meta and hitting massive numbers doesn't really matter. Some people play for the purpose of hitting big numbers, other people play for lore, others for exploration. There's no one set way to play Genshin. It's one thing to help people when they ask for the help, but it's a whole other thing when you force it on someone. Another thing that the Genshin Impact community likes to do is doom post about an upcoming character. It's one thing to have concerns and valid criticisms, but that's not the issue here. The issue is when the Genshin community have called an upcoming character utterly useless, even though they're not even out yet. There have been countless examples of this, but I'll describe the Kazuha situation quickly. Kazuha was doom posted by many in the Genshin Impact community about his viability. Players believed that he would be underwhelming in comparison to other 5 stars because of his low damage potential and because he was a support-oriented unit. Some people even thought that Kazuha would be a weaker version of Sucrose, who's a 4-star. He was actually called a 5-star Sucrose, and people didn't want to waste rolls on that, especially if they already had Sucrose at C6. However, after his official release, Kazuha proved to be extremely versatile, since he offers amazing crowd control and damage buffs, which is where we are at today with him. After Ayato was introduced in the 2.6 update, some players noticed a strange glitch during gameplay, where Ayato's face would disappear. His entire facial structure, like his eyes, his nose, his mouth, would vanish, making him look like a character straight out of a horror game. The glitch only affected Ayato and didn't impact his gameplay mechanics or combat abilities. It was just weird and jarring for many players to see a prominent character at the time missing one of his most defining features: his face. It was a short-lived joke in the Genshin community, but it's still a pretty memorable thing that happens. During a school event in China, a group of students performed a cosplay dance routine that was inspired by Genshin. The performance included choreography and costumes that were in reference to characters in the game, and as we know, Genshin does blend influences from other cultures. The school's principal criticised the performance, calling it too Japanese and inappropriate, particularly considering the complex historical and political relations between China and Japan. Now, the principal's remarks instigated a wave of backlash both from the Genshin community and the broader public. There were a few reasons for this. Genshin draws on many cultural influences, even though it is a Chinese game. Fans felt that the principal was uninformed about categorizing such a performance as solely Japanese. And even though Genshin does have some anime-inspired aesthetics, it is still a Chinese game. Genshin players also felt like the principal's criticism was unwarranted and came across as censorship of creativity. And finally, the principal's comments were seen as an overreaction because it was a harmless dance to celebrate a popular video game, and it wasn't meant to be a political statement. Throughout the years, voice actors for Genshin Impact have faced harassment from fans, especially when players are unhappy with certain game aspects or character-related issues. We'll discuss a few very quickly. In 2022, Kujo Sara's English VA faced harassment after some players were dissatisfied with her character's performance and kits. In 2021, Xiangling's English voice actor received a wave of harassment after players voiced frustrations with Xiangling's abilities and gameplay balancing. In 2024, both Sucrose's and Albedo's English VAs faced online harassment after speaking up about representation issues during the Natlan controversy. Kokomi's English voice actor and Chinese voice actor faced harassment when players criticized Kokomi's initial gameplay mechanics, since her initial performance in combat didn't meet many players' expectations of her. And as a final example, Dory's English voice actor faced harassment after players criticized Dory's gameplay and character design, which people found underwhelming, and some players took issue with Dory's perceived representation as a greedy merchant, leading to accusations of problematic stereotyping. It's important to remember that voice actors aren't involved in character creation or design decisions or gameplay decisions, so it's just not worth harassing voice actors, like, ever. Well, we'll get to that. In September 2021, Genshin's first anniversary backlash ensued. People were frustrated with the underwhelming anniversary rewards that Hoyoverse had offered players. You see, for many live service games, anniversaries are celebrated with generous gifts and in-game events as a way to thank the player base for their continued support. However, the rewards for Genshin's first anniversary was seen as lackluster and stingy, leading to massive disappointment and backlash. The main rewards were a 10 pull, some Mora, Hero's Wit, and most of the larger awards were tied to community-based events like art contests, cosplay competitions, and social media participation. Many players criticized these events for being exclusive to a small number of winners, which makes the vast majority of the player base feel left out. This led to community outrage and backlash, like review bombing. Genshin Impact fans took to the Play Store and the Apple App Store. The game's rating dropped significantly as frustrated players left 1-star reviews, citing their dissatisfaction with the anniversary rewards and Hoyoverse's mishandling of the situation. Players also began a hashtag campaign, which was #HearUs, on Twitter and other social media platforms. This movement was meant to draw attention to players' complaints that were asking Hoyoverse to listen to the community and improve their anniversary rewards. For several days as this backlash was going on, Hoyoverse remained pretty much silent, which only fueled anger in the community. Fans were frustrated that the company weren't addressing their concerns or explaining their reasoning behind the stingy rewards. But after several days of mounting pressure, Hoyoverse eventually responded to the backlash by adding additional rewards to players. As a form of damage control, MiHoYo distributed a 10 pull to all players over the course of several days. The buffing of Zhongli was one of the more notable community-driven changes to Genshin Impact. So Zhongli, the Geo Archon, was released in December 2020 during the game's 1.1 update. He was highly anticipated because of his role as the Geo Archon in Genshin Impact. However, upon his release, many players found his kit to be underwhelming. Despite him being a 5-star, his abilities were perceived as weak in comparison to other 5-stars at the time. Like, the main complaints were that Zhongli's damage wasn't as high as players wanted it to be, his shield strength wasn't great either, and because he was Geo, it felt like he didn't offer enough value to teams. Many players voiced their disappointment on social media, forums, and in-game surveys, complaining that Zhongli was too weak for his lore significance and his 5-star rarity. The complaints were very loud in China, since Zhongli is the Archon of Liyue, and Liyue holds extra cultural significance to China. Hoyoverse actually took notice of this feedback and announced in December 2020 that they were planning to adjust Zhongli's kits. And so, in February 2021, in version 1.3, they did buff Zhongli, which included increasing his shield strength and granting his kit resistance to interruption. Inazuma was one of the most highly anticipated regions in the game. After its release, many players voiced their disappointment and frustration with how certain aspects of the story and characters were handled. The storyline received mixed reactions from players, and there are several key issues that led the backlash. For one, Raiden Shogun's characterization. Before Inazuma's release, the Raiden Shogun had been heavily hyped by the community due to her powerful and mysterious aura. However, many players felt like her character arc was quite underwhelming. While she is set up as a formidable and complex ruler, the way her backstory was revealed and her eventual change of heart in the storyline came across as rushed and not explored properly. The Resistance arc in the Inazuma storyline also faced some criticism. Kutosara and Kokomi, who are key figures in this arc, were also criticized for not being fully developed. People felt like their roles in the story were underutilized and that they didn't receive the depth they deserved. Also, the Resistance's struggle against the shogunate was expected to be a central plot point. However, players felt like the rebellion was being underplayed. Another point of contention was Toma's underutilization. Toma was marketed as a central figure in Inazuma's story and a close ally of the Travelers. However, in the actual story, his involvement was pretty minimal in the eyes of many players, which disappointed them because they expected him to have a larger role in the conflict. Inazuma's ending and resolution was also pretty unsatisfactory for players. Many players were dissatisfied with the Vision Hunt Decree's resolution. The resolution felt rushed and many people felt like the Raiden Shogun's change of heart occurred a bit too easily. The consequences of this and the toll that it took on Inazuma's people weren't explored enough in depth, leaving many people unsatisfied with the story's ending. Sumeru was designed to be inspired by the cultures of South Asia, North Africa, and the Middle East. However, when the character designs and early footage of the Sumeru region were revealed, many people expressed disappointment and frustration, arguing that the characters had predominantly lighter skin tones, which they felt was a sign of whitewashing. Players were expecting characters to reflect the ethnic diversity of these regions, particularly with the characters' skin tones. As such, there was social media outrage, and fans took to platforms like Twitter and Reddit to criticize Hoyoverse for the lack of darker-skinned characters in Sumeru. Some fans compared Sumeru's designs to characters from previous regions like Liyue and Inazuma, which were seen as better representations of their respective cultural inspirations. And hashtags like #FixSumeru and #BoycottGenshin trended as players demanded more accurate representation. Recently, in 2024, Genshin faced significant backlash again surrounding representation, but this time of the Natlan region, which was inspired by African and Latin American cultures. The Genshin community criticised the game for failing to authentically represent the cultures that it drew from, particularly indigenous Latin American and African influences. Of the revealed Natlan cast, only one had a darker skin tone, leading many to express dissatisfaction with the limited diversity. Sounds familiar, no? The backlash extended to the game's voice actors, such as Sucrose's and Albedo's English voice actors, who openly criticised the lack of proper representation. Eventually, a petition was made that demanded better representation in the game, and it gained thousands of signatures as the controversy grew, with calls for Hoyoverse to be more respectful in its cultural depictions. The Yunjin opera controversy in Genshin sparked debate over the cultural representation of traditional Chinese opera in the game. Some players unfamiliar with Chinese opera found her opera-style singing during gameplay to be odd or jarring. This led to debates within the community, with some non-Chinese players feeling disconnected from the performance and questioning its relevance, while many Chinese and other culturally aware players defended Yunjin's representation as a respectful nod to an integral part of Chinese culture. Dea was a highly anticipated 5-star character, given her involvement in the Sumeru storyline, as well as her design. However, when she was released in early 2023, much of the community were disappointed and called for her to be buffed. Players saw that Dea's damage output was underwhelming for a 5-star character. Despite being marketed as a DPS and a tank hybrid, her abilities didn't deal as much damage in comparison to other 5-star characters. Many complained that her skill scaling was low, even when she was built optimally. Dea's kit, which focuses on mitigating damage for teammates, was criticised for being inconsistent and situational. Her elemental skill didn't provide enough defensive utility, and her elemental burst had an odd, clunky animation that was difficult to use in practical situations. So because of this, many players felt like her role as a tank/DPS hybrid wasn't well done. Shortly after her release, players began asking Hoyoverse to buff Dea. They started social media campaigns on threads such as Reddit and Twitter, using the #FixSumeru. fix Daya. Players suggested various fixes. Despite these complaints, Hoyoverse did not release any significant buffs for Daya. The Kave deletion hack caused significant uproar in the community in 2023. This exploit allowed malicious players to permanently delete important in-game objects in co-op mode. The hack was executed when a player controlling Kave entered another player's world and used his abilities to remove essential elements of the game. The exploit was awful and devastating because the deleted objects could not be restored, even after logging out, reinstalling the game, or switching devices. This resulted in players losing access to crucial game content, making it impossible to complete certain quests and puzzles. The hack was primarily targeted and used in co-op, leading players to caution against accepting invitations from strangers, especially people with Kave profile pictures, until the issue was resolved. In October 2021, Hoyoverse escalated its efforts to stop leakers, and this effort was what the Genshin community referred to as the Leakers Hunt Decree, which is a play on the Vision Hunt Decree in the actual game. This decree included legal actions where Hoyoverse would pursue lawsuits against known leakers, filing legal complaints against individuals who shared unreleased contents, and some prominent leakers were hit with cease and desist orders and were forced to take down their posts and overall their platforms. The company also ramped up its efforts to track down data miners and content creators who were distributing these leaks, and they were even working with social media platforms and Discord servers to shut down leak channels. The Leakers Hunt Decree caused a significant stir in the Genshin Impact community, and it sparked heated debates online about leaks and how the company were handling them, and the reaction was pretty mixed. Some players agreed with Hoyoverse's actions because they sympathised and understood that leaks could spoil the excitement of upcoming content and interrupt marketing plans. They also argued that leaks could lead to misinformed expectations about future characters that would still be in development. On the other hand, a lot of people were upset by this crackdown since leaks had become a big part of the community's culture, with some fans even relying on leaked information to decide how to spend their primogems and plan their gameplay accordingly. And they felt that Hoyoverse were being too heavy-handed about it all, especially when it came to legal threats. In 2021, a Singaporean father discovered that his 18-year-old daughter had spent approximately $15,000 on in-game purchases in Genshin over the course of 6 weeks. The father was initially confused by the charges and thought that he had been scammed, only to learn that his daughter had used his credit card, which was linked to her mobile wallets, to make these purchases for primogems. He managed to recover half the amount from his bank, and eventually the full sum was reimbursed after further negotiations. This incident highlighted the addictive nature of gacha mechanics in games like Genshin, which encourages players to spend real-life money for randomized in-game items, a system that people often compare to gambling. Elliot Gindi, the English voice actor for the character Tignari in Genshin Impact, faced intense and deserved backlash in February 2023 after serious allegations of misconduct came to light. The controversy began when multiple individuals, including former fans, came forward with screenshots and accounts of inappropriate conversations that Gindi allegedly had with them. These interactions, which took place on platforms like Discord, included explicit comments, manipulative behaviour, and requests for explicit photos. Some of the victims were reportedly minors, which heightened the severity of the situation. The Genshin Impact community, which includes a large number of young players, reacted with shock and outrage. Fans took to social media to express their disappointments and called for Gindi to be removed from the game. Gindi publicly acknowledged the allegations with an apology on social media. His apology did little to quell the anger of the community, as the accusations were seen as gross abuse of his position of influence. Following this widespread backlash, Hoyoverse released a statement acknowledging the situation and announced that they would be recasting the role of Tignari for the English voice acting of the game. In 2024, a significant drama unfolded within the Genshin Impact community, which was centered on prominent content creators, such as Atsu, Tectone, and Braxophone. This controversy began when Braxophone accused Atsu of gatekeeping Hoyoverse events, suggesting that Atsu was deliberately manipulating access to events and opportunities in the Genshin content creator space. Braxophone claimed that Atsu had blacklisted him from attending community events and meetups, which significantly damaged his reputation and mental health. Atsu responded by releasing a 34-page document in an attempt to clarify his side, outlining how these accusations had severely affected his personal life, which included his marriage and his overall mental well-being. He also accused Tectone of contributing to the hostile environment in the community, which further escalated tensions. I'm not going to explain everything in depth here because it's a very complex and long situation that's been going on for years. As the situation unfolded, other creators, including Enviosity, were dragged into the conflict, which further complicated things. I'm sure there are much better videos that will explain this whole situation if you're interested in knowing the full details. I'm just here, I'm not trying to make this video 20 million hours long, you know what I mean? I'm not going to butcher his name, but the Chinese voice actor for Oz, who is visuals familiar in Genshin, faced significant backlash after being accused of inappropriate behaviour. In 2021, it was revealed that he had committed adultery and manipulated many fans for inappropriate favours. These allegations caused outrage in the gaming community, which led to his swift removal from the role Oz. His involvement in other games were also terminated.